We like to believe that the leaders we admire must also be morally upright, that the people who rise to power do so because they deserve it. But history keeps proving us wrong. Some of the most revered figures, those with statues in public squares, their names etched into school books, their portraits hung in state halls, were not paragons of virtue. They silenced dissent. They waged unjust wars. They lied, exploited, and corrupted with impunity. And yet, they are remembered as heroes. Why? The answer lies not just in propaganda, but in psychology. We don't always follow the most ethical leaders. We follow the ones who fulfill our psychological needs. The ones who embody strength when we feel afraid. The ones who promise certainty in uncertain times. The ones who tell us a story we want to believe, even if that story is a lie. In this film, we'll examine 10 uncomfortable truths about why we idolize corrupt leaders, and why doing so may feel safer than facing the truth. They called him a savior, a man who saved his nation from chaos, who restored order, who stood firm when everyone else was afraid. His portrait hangs in schools, his speeches are quoted in parliaments, and yet he ordered mass arrests. He censored the press. He sent thousands to die for a war history now calls unjust. But somehow he's remembered not for the blood on his hands, but for the strength in his voice. Not for what he destroyed, but for what he seemed to protect. Why? Because we're not taught to see leaders as flawed. We're taught to see them as legends. And legends don't tolerate ambiguity. The human mind craves clarity. In times of crisis, it seeks out symbols, figures who appear unbreakable, righteous, destined. We don't want leaders who reflect our doubts. We want leaders who silence them. That's where the myth of the hero begins, not in facts but in fear, not in ethics but in the emotional hunger for stability. The most dangerous leaders don't seize power. They are invited, summoned by a collective longing for salvation, and the more uncertain the times, the stronger the fantasy. He's not just a man, people say. He's history in motion. He's fate. He's hope. Even when the facts scream otherwise, the myth persists. Because the myth gives meaning to pain. It redeems suffering. It says, we didn't endure this for nothing. We were led by a giant. This is the first betrayal, not by the leader, but by our own minds. The psychological machinery that makes us crave order also makes us vulnerable to those who pretend to offer it. And once we crown someone a savior, we stop seeing them clearly. Their cruelty becomes necessity, their lies become strategy, their opponents become traitors, and we, those who follow, become believers. Not in truth, but in the story we need to survive. They called him a savior, a man who saved his nation from chaos, who restored order, who stood firm when everyone else was afraid. His portrait hangs in schools, his speeches are quoted in parliaments, and yet he ordered mass arrests. He censored the press. He sent thousands to die for a war history now calls unjust. But somehow he's remembered not for the blood on his hands, but for the strength in his voice. Not for what he destroyed, but for what he seemed to protect. Why? Because we're not taught to see leaders as flawed. We're taught to see them as legends. And legends don't tolerate ambiguity. The human mind craves clarity. In times of crisis, it seeks out symbols, figures who appear unbreakable, righteous, destined. We don't want leaders who reflect our doubts. We want leaders who silence them. That's where the myth of the hero begins, not in facts but in fear, not in ethics but in the emotional hunger for stability. The most dangerous leaders don't seize power. They are invited, summoned by a collective longing for salvation, And the more uncertain the times, the stronger the fantasy. He's not just a man, people say. He's history in motion. He's fate. He's hope. Even when the facts scream otherwise, the myth persists. Because the myth gives meaning to pain. It redeems suffering. It says, we didn't endure this for nothing. We were led by a giant. This is the first betrayal, not by the leader, but by our own minds. The psychological machinery that makes us crave order also makes us vulnerable to those who pretend to offer it. And once we crown someone a savior, we stop seeing them clearly. Their cruelty becomes necessity, their lies become strategy, their opponents become traitors, and we, those who follow, become believers. Not in truth, but in the story we need to survive. We like to believe that people choose their leaders based on principles, that morality guides our votes, our loyalties, our trust. But in moments of fear, morality fades. When chaos looms and uncertainty dominates, we reach not for wisdom, but for certainty, not for ethics, but for strength. It doesn't matter if that strength is cruel, corrupt, or even violent. If it feels decisive, it feels safe, and in a frightened society, safety is worth more than virtue. This is the seduction of force, a psychological trade we make in silence. I will give you my conscience if you give me protection. I will question less if I can fear less. The leader who offers that bargain doesn't need to be good, only convincing, only dominant, only louder than doubt. We begin to see power not as a tool, but as a sign of truth. We assume that because someone can command, they must also understand that if they control others, they must deserve too. And soon we confuse intimidation with leadership and obedience with unity. The more ruthless they are, the more competent they appear. The more resistance they crush, the more inevitable they feel. And in that illusion, we begin to believe something deeply dangerous, that moral hesitation is weakness and moral clarity is for the naive. So we shift our expectations. We no longer demand that our leaders be fair. We only ask that they be strong enough to make us feel safe. Their actions, no matter how unjust, are reinterpreted as necessary. Their lies become tactics. Their corruption becomes the cost of stability. Even when we see the damage they cause, we rationalize it, because to admit the truth would require confronting our own surrender, and that's harder than blaming someone else. Over time, this becomes a cycle. The leader acts with impunity, the public justifies it, and the system adapts around it. Institutions stop restraining power and begin enabling it. Loyalty replaces accountability, fear replaces debate, and we, the people, become complicit, not because we wanted a tyrant, but because we feared a void. In this way, power doesn't just fill a vacuum, it manufactures one, and once it does, it becomes the only voice left standing. That voice may not speak truth, but it speaks loud enough to drown out everything else, and in that noise, morality disappears. We often imagine ourselves as independent thinkers, moral agents capable of standing up against injustice. But when faced with authority, that self-position collapses more quickly than we'd like to admit. In the early 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted a series of experiments that shocked the world. Participants were instructed to administer electric shocks to another person for answering questions incorrectly. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. What mattered was that a man in a lab coat calmly told them to continue, and most of them did. They heard screams, they saw pleas for mercy, but they kept going, simply because someone in authority told them to. The implication is terrifying. Ordinary people without hatred or malice are capable of extraordinary cruelty when they believe they are just following orders. Milgram's study wasn't about sadism, it was about obedience, and it revealed something deeply unsettling about human psychology. Authority doesn't just give instructions, it erases doubt. It rewrites conscience. It offers moral outsourcing. You don't have to decide what's right. You just have to comply. That relief of not having to carry the burden of responsibility is what makes authority so seductive and so dangerous. In moments of uncertainty, we look to someone confident, someone who sounds like they know what they're doing, and the more confident they appear, the more likely we are to silence our own instincts. This is how cults form, how bureaucracies enable atrocities, how societies slip into authoritarianism, not with a bang, but with nods of agreement and quiet complicity. Hannah Arendt called it the banality of evil, the idea that horrific acts don't require monsters, only functionaries. People who do evil not because they want to, but because they don't question the system they serve. And the truth is, most of us are capable of that. We follow traffic laws, we wait in lines, we trust uniforms, titles, credentials. These habits are necessary for social order, but they're also vulnerabilities. In the wrong hands, our instinct to obey becomes a tool for manipulation. History shows this pattern again and again. In Nazi Germany, millions obeyed decrees they knew were wrong because disobedience felt riskier than compliance. In Rwanda, ordinary citizens participated in genocide after being told their victims were enemies of the state. In the corporate world, whistleblowers are punished not because they're wrong, but because they disrupt the comfort of obedience. This isn't just history, it's now. Every time we excuse unethical behavior because it comes from someone in charge, we're reinforcing the psychology of obedience. Every time we reward decisiveness over deliberation, we're signaling that power matters more than principle. The danger isn't just in corrupt leaders, it's in the willingness of ordinary people to follow them without question. And that willingness isn't rare, it's everywhere. It's in us. So what does resistance look like? It begins with awareness, with the uncomfortable act of thinking for ourselves, with refusing to outsource our conscience to anyone, no matter how qualified they seem. True responsibility means asking the harder question, not just what should I do, but why am I doing it? Who benefits? Who suffers? Who am I trusting to think for me? And why? Authority will always offer comfort, but that comfort often comes at the cost of clarity. To reclaim our moral agency, we must learn to tolerate discomfort, to be skeptical of certainty, to be suspicious of simplicity, and to have the courage to say no when saying yes would be easier. Because obedience may keep the peace in the moment, but in the long arc of history, it is disobedience that often preserves what is human. The truth is rarely comforting. It is messy, incomplete, and often painful. It demands reflection, responsibility, and change. Illusions, on the other hand, are elegant. They are clean, simple, and emotionally satisfying. And in uncertain times, that emotional satisfaction becomes more valuable than accuracy. We don't believe lies because we are stupid. We believe them because they feel better than doubt. A strong illusion answers our deepest fears. It tells us who is right and who is wrong, who to trust and who to blame. It organizes chaos into story. And the more uncertain the world becomes, the more we reach for these stories, not because they're true, but because they're coherent. This is the hidden danger of leadership mythologies, national narratives, and ideological certainty. They are not designed to reflect reality. They are designed to reduce anxiety, and we cling to them precisely because they simplify what would otherwise overwhelm us. A corrupt leader who projects confidence becomes a symbol, not a person. His lies become doctrine, his failures become sacrifice. As long as the illusion feels right, the truth becomes irrelevant. And when someone tries to challenge that illusion, when they point to facts, to evidence, to contradiction, they are not met with curiosity, they are met with hostility. Because they are not just threatening the narrative, they are threatening the psychological stability that the narrative provides. This is why cults demonize dissenters, why authoritarian regimes jail journalists, why conspiracy theories resist contradiction. The illusion isn't just a belief, it's a structure of emotional survival. And so we protect it even when it harms us, especially when it harms others. Because if the illusion collapses, so does our sense of coherence. The human mind does not seek truth, it seeks patterns, meaning, certainty, even if those things are false. That's why propaganda works best when it is not obviously false, but emotionally perfect. It confirms what we already want to believe. It flatters our side. It explains our suffering without implicating our choices. It turns confusion into purpose, pain into heroism, defeat into destiny. And in that transformation we feel seen, we feel guided, we feel safe. Reality rarely offers such comfort. It is ambiguous. It contradicts itself. It makes demands we would rather avoid. So we choose fantasy over complexity, simplicity over nuance. Leaders who promise clarity over those who invite dialogue. And over time, that preference becomes a habit, a cognitive shortcut, a cultural addiction. We stop asking if something is true and start asking if it is reassuring, if it is aligned with our team, if it sounds like something we already believe. The truth doesn't stand a chance in such an environment. It doesn't compete on emotional grounds. It simply exists, silent, often uninvited, and almost always inconvenient. But if we are to reclaim agency, we must learn to tolerate the discomfort of reality, to live without certainty, to resist the stories that seduce us, even when they speak directly to our fears. Because illusions may protect us from pain, but they also blind us to freedom. And without truth, however difficult, we are not citizens. We are followers of a fiction, loyal to a dream, terrified of waking up. History is not what happened, it is what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. The past does not speak for itself. It must be interpreted, narrated, edited, and the hands that shape it are rarely neutral. Every monument is a message, every textbook a decision. What is celebrated, what is ignored, what is simplified. These choices are not accidental. They are acts of power. A society does not merely inherit history, it manufactures it. And in that manufacturing, memory becomes a tool, not of truth, but of identity. We do not honor the past to understand it. We honor it to legitimize the present, to justify who we are and who we are not. This is why we remember victories more than failures, heroes more than victims, myths more than contradictions. The past becomes a curated collection of moments that flatter us, and the more a narrative flatters us, the more suspicious we should be. Because real history is complicated. It resists clean arcs. It contains moral ambiguity, failure, cruelty. It implicates not just them, but us, not just the other side, but our side too. And so we erase. We romanticize. We compress centuries into slogans. We turn atrocities into unfortunate footnotes. We recast violent men as visionaries, colonizers as pioneers, oppressors as builders of civilization. We silence the stories that do not serve the image we wish to see in the mirror. This is not a glitch in the system. It is the system. Nations need mythology to survive. Movements need purity. Leaders need to be remembered as inevitable. And memory, once controlled, becomes a fortress against doubt. If you question the past, you threaten the structure built upon it. That's why regimes rewrite history, why dissenting historians are censored, why uncomfortable facts are labeled unpatriotic. The control of memory is the control of meaning. And meaning is what gives power its shape. When we only tell the story of winners, we forget the cost of their victory. When we erase the complexity of revolution, we invite its repetition without understanding. When we build our identities on half-truths, we inherit not pride but fragility, because anything built on a lie must be defended with more lies. And eventually the weight of forgetting becomes heavier than the truth we tried to bear. But the truth does not disappear. It lingers. In diaries unread, in graves unmarked, in whispers passed between generations. It waits. And those who listen, who dig, who remember what was meant to be lost, they do not just recover history. They reclaim freedom. Because to remember fully is to live honestly, to carry the past not as myth, but as responsibility. And responsibility is the only path toward a future that isn't just a repetition of what we failed to face. Every system of power needs a threat, not because the threat is real, but because the fear is useful. Nothing unites a population faster than a common enemy. Nothing silences dissent more effectively than the accusation of betrayal. And so, again and again, leaders manufacture division, not as failure, but as strategy. They do not just tolerate conflict, they cultivate it. They point to the other, the outsider, the deviant, and say, "There, that is why you are afraid. That is who threatens your safety, your job, your family, your values." And in that pointing, something dangerous happens. We begin to look at each other not as fellow citizens, but as threats, as obstacles, as symbols of everything that's wrong. And once that transformation takes place, unity becomes easy. Not real unity rooted in compassion or shared vision, but hollow unity rooted in shared fear. The kind of unity that chants in unison but listens to nothing, that marches against, never toward, that defines itself not by what it believes, but by what it hates. This is not new. It is the oldest trick in the political playbook, the invention of the barbarian, the heretic, the invader, the internal enemy. These categories shift over time, but the purpose remains: control. A divided people is a manageable people. When we are suspicious of each other, we do not question power. When we are afraid of each other, we do not notice who benefits from our fear. And so the illusion continues. We think we are defending ourselves, when in fact we are surrendering. We think we are fighting for truth, when in fact we are reacting to narratives crafted to distract us. In this way, fear becomes a kind of currency. It is exchanged for loyalty, for silence, for compliance. Politicians use it to win elections. Media outlets use it to capture attention. Corporations use it to sell certainty in a bottle. The result is not stability, but polarization. A society so fractured that conversation becomes impossible and trust becomes unthinkable, where every disagreement feels like betrayal, where compromise feels like weakness, where dialogue feels like surrender. And in that fracture, the powerful thrive. They present themselves as the last defense against chaos. They offer clarity where there is noise, strength where there is fear, direction where there is confusion. And we accept their offers not because we are convinced, but because we are exhausted. Exhausted by the noise, the conflict, the uncertainty. So we retreat into echo chambers. We mistake volume for truth. We begin to enjoy our outrage, to rely on it, to define ourselves through it. Because outrage is easy. It feels righteous. It feels active. But it is also blinding. It narrows our vision until we see only enemies, never people. And in that narrowness, we lose something essential, the ability to recognize manipulation, because the greatest danger is not the enemy we are told to fear. It is the enemy we never question, the one who taught us to fear in the first place. And if we are to recover the possibility of unity, we must first dismantle the machinery of division. We must ask who benefits from our rage, who gains from our suspicion, who profits from our silence. Because real unity is not built on shared enemies, it is built on shared humanity. And no leader, no party, no movement that depends on division can ever offer it. We like to imagine that propaganda is something done to us, that lies come from above, imposed by leaders, media, or institutions. But the most powerful illusions are not enforced, they are welcomed. We do not simply receive deception, we collaborate with it, we shape it, we repeat it, because the illusion does not begin in the speech of a dictator, it begins in the silence of the crowd, in the shared decision to not question, to not look too closely, to let it be. And in that silence, falsehood grows roots. It becomes normal, familiar, safe. Over time, truth becomes not just inconvenient, it becomes disruptive, impolite, dangerous. It threatens the fragile consensus that keeps everything comfortable. So we agree, without saying so, to protect the illusion, to punish those who speak too plainly, to reward those who say nothing at all. This is how the crowd becomes complicit, not because they are fools, but because they are afraid, because participation in the illusion feels safer than confronting what lies beneath. To be a whistleblower is to be cast out. To be skeptical is to be disloyal. To doubt is to become the enemy. So we self-police. We adapt our words, our opinions, even our memories, to match the script. We know which truths to avoid, which silences to maintain, which beliefs to perform in public regardless of what we feel in private. And slowly, the illusion becomes not just external, but internal. It is no longer something we pretend to believe. It becomes something we feel we must believe, because to reject it now would not just threaten the system, it would threaten our place inside it, our jobs, our relationships, our sense of belonging. And so we keep nodding, we keep smiling, we keep pretending that the illusion is real even when we know it is not, especially when we know it is not. Because the illusion has become more than belief, it has become identity. And identity, once threatened, fights to protect itself. This is why entire societies can drift into madness while appearing completely sane, why obvious lies are accepted with sincerity, why cruelty becomes routine. It is not just about power, it is about comfort, continuity, belonging. And the more people believe, the more pressure there is to join them, because to remain silent feels wise, to go along feels kind, to question feels selfish. But this is how illusions survive, not through force, through consensus, through the quiet agreement of millions to not say what they know. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because history is full of these moments, of crowds who knew better but stayed quiet, of movements that claimed virtue while committing atrocity, of people who said, "This is just how things are," but nothing about an illusion is inevitable. It only endures if we continue to protect it. And if there is a way forward, it begins not with accusation, but with honesty, with the courage to say out loud what others only dare to think, not to destroy, but to liberate, not to shame, but to wake, because when enough people stop pretending, the illusion dies, and truth, long buried, begins to breathe again. Most people are not immoral, but they are social, and when the two come into conflict, morality loses. We want to be good, but more than that, we want to belong, to be accepted, to be included in the story our group tells about itself, and when that story demands silence or complicity or cruelty, we often comply, not because we agree, but because we fear exclusion. This is the quiet force of group identity. It does not argue, it does not coerce, it seduces. It wraps us in language and loyalty. It makes us feel safe, seen, and certain. And when the group is threatened, we defend it, even at the cost of our own values. This is not always conscious. Most of the time, we don't even notice it. We just adjust. We laugh when others laugh. We stay quiet when they stay quiet. We adopt the slogans, repeat the talking points, mimic the outrage. We become mirrors of the tribe, not because we lack conviction, but because we crave connection. The need to belong is older than the need to be right. In ancient times, exile meant death. Isolation was a punishment worse than pain. So we learn from childhood to read the signals of the group, to conform to survive. But in the modern world, that instinct becomes dangerous, because now what the group demands may not be safety, but submission. And our instincts do not always know the difference. We silence our doubts. We downplay our concerns. We convince ourselves that what feels wrong must be fine because everyone else is fine with it. And slowly, moral clarity fades, not in a blaze, but in small decision hesitations, compromises. We tell ourselves it's not the right time, not the right place, not our job. But morality does not ask for permission. It does not wait for consensus. It speaks quietly, and it speaks early. And if we do not listen, it goes silent, replaced by the louder voice of group affirmation. This is how people come to defend the indefensible, not with evil in their hearts, but with silence in their mouths. They watch cruelty unfold and say nothing, or worse, they rationalize it. Because once the group is spoken, dissent feels like betrayal, and betrayal feels worse than guilt. So we protect the group, we protect our place within it, and in doing so we lose something vital, the ability to know what is right when others are wrong. This is why moral courage is so rare, not because people do not know what is right, but because they are afraid to know it alone. The price of seeing clearly is isolation. The price of speaking clearly is rejection, and few of us are willing to pay that price. So we close our eyes. We nod along. We become good members of the group and terrible witnesses to truth. But there is a different path, a harder path. It begins not with defiance, but with honesty, with a willingness to feel uncomfortable, to be disliked, to risk being alone. Because real conscience is not democratic. It does not check the polls. It does not ask who else agrees. It simply knows. And if we are to remain fully human, we must listen to that knowing, even when it contradicts everything around us, especially then, because morality, when it matters most, is never the voice of the crowd. It is the whisper that survives beneath the noise. Trust is fragile. It takes time, patience, and vulnerability. Fear, on the other hand, is fast. It is immediate, reactive, protective. And when we are uncertain, when we do not understand the world or cannot predict it, we choose fear, not because we want to, but because it feels safer. Safer to assume the worst, to prepare for betrayal, to close the door before someone might walk away. We learn this early, in relationships, in schoolyards, in politics, and over time the habit becomes reflex. We stop evaluating others for who they are and start preparing for who they might become if they turned against us. We stop building bridges and start erecting defenses. And those defenses, emotional, social, ideological, become our identity. We do not just fear others. We begin to believe we must. That vigilance is wisdom, that cynicism is maturity, that hope is naive, and in that mindset we do something strange. We project our fear outward and call it truth. We build narratives of danger. We imagine hidden enemies. We distrust kindness. We interpret complexity as deception. And the more afraid we are, the more we seek something to anchor us, something that feels certain, strong, unquestioned. This is why we are drawn to power, not just raw force, but the appearance of control, of certainty, of authority that makes the world simple again. We do not follow the powerful because they are right. We follow them because they make us feel safe, because they speak with conviction when we feel confusion, because they promise order in a world that feels chaotic. And in this exchange, safety for freedom, simplicity for truth, we lose something vital. We stop trusting people and start trusting systems. We stop trusting dialogue and start trusting dogma. We elevate leaders not for their wisdom, but for their dominance. We mistake confidence for competence. We mistake control for care. We mistake fear for insight. And we do all of this quietly because the alternative is too vulnerable. To trust people is to be open to disappointment. To trust people is to give them the power to hurt us. And most of us are not willing to risk that, so we hand our trust to institutions, to ideologies, to myths. We would rather trust a system that cannot love us than a person who might leave us. Because systems do not reject, they commend, they offer certainty, they do not demand intimacy, only obedience, and that bargain of control over connection shapes everything. We build societies not on trust but on surveillance, not on faith but on enforcement, not on empathy but on efficiency. We create structures designed to protect us from each other, forgetting that what protects can also isolate, that safety without connection becomes a prison, that suspicion once normalized becomes prophecy. The more we expect betrayal, the more we interpret ambiguity as threat. The more we interpret ambiguity as threat, the more we act with preemptive cruelty, and soon fear is no longer a response, it is a worldview, a philosophy, a political program. And in that world, trust becomes subversive, kindness becomes suspect, vulnerability becomes weakness, and what is left is only force, admired, obeyed, replicated. But power cannot give us what trust once did. It cannot offer belonging. It cannot create intimacy. It cannot repair loneliness. It only masks those wounds with spectacle, with control, with discipline. And so we remain afraid, even when we are safe, even when we win, because what we fear is not just others. It is the possibility that no one is truly with us, that the world we built to protect us has made us unreachable, and until we are willing to risk trust again, we will remain loyal not to each other, but to fear itself. The most dangerous illusions are not the ones forced upon us. They are the ones we choose, the ones we protect, the ones we build our lives around, because without them, things fall apart. It is easier to believe the world is ordered, that leaders are wise, that systems are fair. Easier to believe cruelty is rare, corruption is accidental, and history bends toward justice. These are not conclusions. We are taught them in school books, in media, in slogans. We grow up reciting them before we ever understand them, and by the time we do, they have become part of who we are. To question them feels like betrayal. To abandon them feels like disintegration. And so, we defend the illusion. We call it hope. We call it progress. We call it patriotism, or pride, or peace. But beneath those names is something else. A refusal to see clearly. Because clarity hurts. It ruptures. It destroys the comfort we've built in the dark. And yet, that is what truth demands. Not reverence, not applause, but surrender. To truth is to grieve. It is to recognize that we have been wrong, that we have been silent when we should have spoken, that we have accepted stories that were never ours to believe. And grief, real grief, is not polite. It does not fit into slogans. It does not ask for permission. It comes when the illusion breaks and the weight of unacknowledged reality rushes in. This is why many never wake up, not because they cannot, but because they won't, because waking means losing something. Illusion is not free, but it feels safe. Truth is not kind, but it sets you free. Between them lies the price, the pain of seeing what we avoided, the loss of who we thought we were, the loneliness of stepping outside the story everyone else still believes. But the reward is real, not happiness, not certainty, but something deeper, integrity. A life not borrowed, not performed, not inherited, but chosen. A conscience that is not outsourced, a voice that is not scripted, a freedom that is not permission, but awareness. And with that freedom comes a burden, the burden of knowing, of seeing injustice and not looking away, of hearing silence and choosing to speak, of being surrounded by illusion and refusing to play along. This is the cost of waking. This is the pain of truth. It does not rescue you. It does not protect you. It makes you responsible. But it also makes you whole. Because in a world built on lies, to speak even a single truth is to begin the work of repair, to tear a hole in the mask, to let in light, to remind others that they are not crazy, that someone else sees it too, and maybe that is enough, not to fix the world, not to win, but to stop pretending. And in that small refusal to perform the illusion, something real begins, something alive, something human. And that, in the end, is what we are most afraid of. Not truth itself, but what it demands of us. The price of honesty is never comfort, it is freedom, and freedom is hard. As Nietzsche once said, convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. We don't just inherit illusions, we defend them, sometimes fiercely, sometimes blindly. But what would it mean to live without them? Not safer, just more awake. The conversations that follow might help us all become more conscious about the illusions we protect and the truths we avoid. And before you go, tell me, which of these illusions, power, certainty, identity, feels most seductive to you? Leave a comment. Let's continue this conversation, not just to question the world, but to change the way we live in it. Until next time, remember, the most dangerous illusion isn't the one they give us, it's the one we refuse to give up.